So, hello everyone. Today at our weekly seminar, Vincent Divol. So Vincent Divol will be our today's speaker. Vincent is a PhD student in our team, a third-year PhD student. Although being there for one more additional year, whatever, and he will present some of his recent work that he has done by himself, working on density estimation on geometric object, manifold, and tackling this problem using an optimal transport perspective. Vincent, you can go ahead.
Yes. Today I'm going to present you some recent work I did. It's a work on a very classical topic in statistics, which is a topic of density estimation. But as Theo said, there will be a twist, as I'm going to consider the case where the densities are supported on certain shapes, so it will be manifolds. And so we're going to see how this classical topic will be impacted by this assumption. So first, I'm going to recall some very simple things and the basic results on density estimation. So I am aware that not everybody here is a statistician or is familiar with statistics. So if you have to please do not hesitate to interrupt me if there is anything that you do not understand, as I will try to recall everything. Okay. So really, you can interrupt me. Okay, so first I'm going to recall the Minimax framework. So it is a framework in statistics to be able to assess the quality of estimators. And the idea is the following. You have some observations, x1, xn, and you assume that those observations come from some underlying measure mu, and these are IID samples from this measure. And here you make some model assumptions, which means that you will assume that mu belongs to some set P of probability measures. And here we are on some Euclidean space RD. So for instance, P can be the set of normal random variables with a certain mean theta and some covariance matrix. Okay, this is an example of set P. And then what we're trying to reconstruct is some quantity related to the underlying measure mu. That's to say theta of mu. For instance, theta of mu can be the mean of mu, it can be, I don't know, the variance, or it can be the whole density, it can be a lot of things. And then what we're trying to do is to build what we call an estimator, that's to say a function hat theta of n, which takes as an input our observations and output some object which hopefully is close to the real theta of mu. And to assess the quality of this estimator, we introduce a loss function L, which will just be a pseudometric. And what we call the risk of the estimator under mu is the expected value of the loss function. And of course, what I would like to have is an estimator with the smallest risk possible. And to do so, to quantify what is the best risk possible, we introduce what we call the minimax risk. So the minimax risk depends on three things: theta, what we are trying to estimate, P, the underlying statistical model, and L, the loss function. And it is defined as the best risk an estimator can attain uniformly on your class P. That's to say, this is the infimum over all estimator hat theta of n, of the supremum over mu in P, of the risk of the estimator hat theta n under the low mu. Okay, so this is really the best risk one can have. So this is very general, and what we're going to focus on here is a specific instance of this general problem, which is the problem of density estimation. So in the problem of density estimation, what we're trying to estimate, theta of mu, will be f, the underlying density of the measure mu. And of course, to be able to say meaningful things on the risk, we need to make some assumption on the underlying density. And typically, what we will assume is that the density is of regularity S. So for instance, here you have a PSD, which will be the set of probability measures on RD, which are of regularity S. That's to say they will belong in a ball in some Sobolev space HSP. So it just means this is of regularity S. And then for the loss function, you can choose, for instance, the LP loss, and an estimator will just be a function that we hope is close to the real density with respect to the LP norm. Okay, and so this is very classical problem in statistics, and we know exactly what the minimax risk is, and there are a lot of minimax estimators. So what we call a minimax estimators is an estimator which will attain the minimax risk up to a constant when n the number of observations is large. And so, for instance, if you consider this problem, then you know that minimax estimators exist, for instance, projections estimators or minimax estimators or wavelet density estimators. And here I'm going to present you a special kind of estimator, which is minimax, which is what we call a kernel density estimator. So the idea is the following. You take k, which is a kernel function. It is a function whose integral is equal to 1, and it needs to satisfy some additional constraints here that we will not detail. And then you just define the convolution between k and the measure nu, as usual. That's to say, it will be a function with k star nu of x, which is the integral of k x minus y that we integrate against nu of y. And then what you can consider is the kernel with bandwidth h. You just rescale everything by h. And when you have your sample, x1, xn, you can always consider a very simple measure, which is the empirical measure, which is nu of n, which is 1 over n, times the sum of the direct masses located at xi. And so your kernel density estimator will be just the convolution of nu n by this kernel of bandwidth h. And now, of course, well, the crucial choice is how should you choose the kernel, the bandwidth. And here, what happens is that you have a very nice decomposition of the risk into a bias part and a variance part. So the bias is, by definition, the distance between what you're trying to estimate. So here it is mu, or f, the underlying density, and the expected value of your estimator. So the expected value here, by linearity, it is just given by kh star nu. So what you can see is that actually here the bias is very simple to analyze because it is given by the norm of kh star mu minus nu. So if you introduce the linear operator ah, which is defined like this by saying that ah of phi is kh star phi minus phi, then you're just looking at the LP norm of h of nu. And so here just you can just bound this by saying that it's smaller than the operator norm of ah times the HSP norm of nu. And by definition, we have assumed that the HSP norm of nu is smaller than some constant r. So really, what we have to do is just to bound this operator norm of ah. And then it is really a classical, not very complicated exercise in Fourier analysis to bound this operator norm and to see that it is smaller than h to the power s, where s is the regularity. And this is where we need that to have these assumptions on the kernel. So this is for the bias part. We also have a second term, which is the variance of the estimator. And here it is even simpler. Because the kernel density estimator is just a sum of ID terms, so that when you take the variance, you will have a sum of n times the same term. So actually, you can bound the variance very simply by this quantity, and you will obtain something of the order 1 over n times h to the power d. So this is the picture that you should have in mind. The risk is the sum of two terms, bias term and fluctuation terms. with the bias which increases with age, whereas the variance is decreasing. And now if you try to find the optimal age, then it is of the order n to the power -1 over 2s plus d, and you will obtain a risk of the order n to the power -s over 2s plus d. So here you can see that when s is very large, you will have a rate of convergence which is very close to n to the power -1/2. And -1/2, this is what we call in statistics a parametric rate of convergence. That's to say, most of the time, we cannot do much better than having a rate of convergence of order 1 over square root of n. So when s is very large, we have this very good rate. And also what we can show is that this risk is actually the minimax risk. That's to say, we cannot do better than this. So this means that in some way, we have solved this problem from a minimax perspective. We have found a minimax estimate. And here, actually, what I want to insist on is the following. Now assume that D is large. So when D is large, this is what we call the framework of high-dimensional statistics. And what you can see is that the variance of the estimator becomes very large. NH to the power D is very small because D is very, very large, so that the variance is very large. And so this means that the rate of the kernel estimator becomes very, very slow. Okay, if D is very large with respect to S, then this is very slow. And so in practice, your estimator will not work at all, okay, without further assumptions. So this is a very classical phenomenon in high-dimensional statistics that we often call the curse of dimensionality, and which consists in saying that most classical techniques will completely fail in high-dimensional settings. And what we should do to overcome this curse of dimensionality is to make some assumptions on our signal in some way or another. What is precisely the setting of high-dimensional statistics? It is just very simple. This is the following. You still have n observations x1, xn in OR-D, but no, D is very large. And for instance, what you can think of is the xi's being images, because an image is described by the set of its pixels, so that you will have actually a vector of size several, of size the number of pixels, so it can be several millions, for instance. So you will be in a case where you have D, which is very large with respect to n. And here, actually, if you want to be able to say meaningful things on your dataset, you will need to make some stronger assumptions. And in some way or another, you will need to say that there is a low dimensional structure underlying the observations. This will be the key assumption. And here, I really want to insist on the fact that this assumption is not artificial. Why? Well, there is a very striking example. It consists in considering the uniform distribution on the cube. So consider the uniform distribution on the cube in high dimension. And as I said before, you can always represent a vector in high dimension as an image by just saying that one pixel corresponds to one entry of the vector. And so if you look at an image, what a sample of the uniform distribution on the cube looks like, then it will look like this, like complete white noise. Okay. And of course, if you want to be able to, if we have pictures that we want to be, and we want to be able to say meaningful things on such pictures, then we do not want to consider, we do not have in mind picture like this. And hopefully, if we have in mind a classification task or a clustering task, then it means that there will be a small number of key features that will help us to classify between our different classes. And the small number of key features, well, we can interpret them as representing some kind of low-dimensional structure. Well, so all of this is really vague from a mathematical point of view, and there are a lot of different possibilities to make this precise. For instance, we can assume that there is some sparsity in our dataset, or we can also assume that there is some generative model which is very simple, like in the single index model or the multi-index model. Or also we can make constraints on the shape of the support. And this is the assumption that we're going to make here. So the simplest assumption one can think of is to assume that our datasets are close to a vector space of low dimension. And what we will do in the following is to relax this assumption by assuming that our dataset is close to a manifold. So here, maybe I will not get into too much details about when this assumption is satisfied, because, well, we are in the datashape team, so hopefully we are convinced that this is the case in some datasets. So here, just two simple examples where in the first display, you have some pictures of a piggy bank taken from different angles. And here, well, hopefully, well, so this is a dataset in high dimension because you're looking at pictures. And hopefully there is a low dimensional structure hidden behind this dataset. And even this low dimensional structure should be homeomorphic to a circle. So this is the first example. And then you have this well-known example also of the conformations of the cyclooctane molecule, which lives in a space of a dimension, a few hundreds, whereas you can see that the conformations will actually be close to a two-dimensional shape. Okay, so I will not get into the details on those two examples. So let's move forward. All right, so well, what we had to do for density estimation is to assume some regularity for the underlying density. And here it will be the same. We'll need to make some assumptions on the regularity of manifolds. So here, well, most of you are probably familiar with this object. The key quantity to assess the regularity of a manifold will be the reach. So, well, the reach, there are a lot of different equivalent definitions. For instance, you can say that this is the largest radius R, such that the projection on your manifold is defined on the R tubular neighborhood of the manifold. And maybe the most striking definition is the following. Assume that your manifold is a rigid object, then the reach of the manifold is the radius of the largest ball one can make roll around the manifold without bumping into the manifold. So what's really nice about this reach assumption is that it tells you that your manifold is regular in two different ways. First, it gives you a local regularity of your manifold. This is the first display, this one. It tells you that, so having a large reach tells you that your manifold cannot be too curved. As for instance, here you see that you cannot make a large ball rolls at this place because you have a pinched structure and your curvature is too high at this place. So having a large reach tells you that you are locally regular, that to say your curvature is not very high. But also it gives you a global regularity. So this is the right display here, where here you have two branches of some manifold. And what happens is that the two branches are very smooth. This is not an issue, but it happens that they are very close to one another. And here what will happen is that if this happens, then also we'll not be able to make a large ball rolls because it will bump in the middle. So this is what we call a bottleneck structure. And you cannot read this locally on your manifold. This is really a global assumption you need to make on your manifold, and it tells you in some way that your manifold is regular also. So we will always assume that the reach of our manifold are larger than some constant, tau mean. And also we need to assume that our manifolds are CK. So one way to quantify this is the following. You will just, so you call MKD, the collection of d-dimensional manifolds with controlled reach, and such that locally your manifold is a graph of some function, and this function should be CK with a controlled CK norm. So this is a rather intuitive way of saying that a manifold is CK and to quantify the CK norm of the manifold. All right. So now we have a problem. We assume that x1, x1 are sampled according to some mu, and mu is supported on some unknown manifold, ordi. And also, we will assume some regularity on the underlying density. Let's say it's of regularity S. And we want to estimate mu. So, well, what has been done for this problem? Well, there have been a lot of works, or some works, which have considered this problem with respect to a pointwise loss. So what do I mean by this? I mean that I give you a point, x. I know that x is in the manifold, and I want to know what is the density of the underlying measure at this point x. So here, what I'm trying to estimate is just a real number, okay, which is the density at this point. And so here, well, we know to do this. There have been some papers which are more or less all based on kernel density estimation and which propose estimators with known rates of convergence. For instance, there is this very recent paper by Clément Behrenfeld and Mark Hoffman, which propose a way to design minimax estimators and even adaptive estimators with the Gordon-Schluger-Levski method. All right, but if you want to do like we did before and we considered LP loss, then what we want to reconstruct is the whole measure, the whole density. And before, what we were choosing was just an LP loss. But here, actually, it's not clear how this should work because the question is the LP loss with respect to what measure? Of course, you would like maybe to take the LP loss with the LP norm with respect to the ambient Lebesgue measure, but then none of your measure mu supported on the manifold will be absolutely continuous with respect to the Lebesgue measure, so this will not work. And you may also choose other standard metrics between probability measures, such as the total variation metric, or the Hellinger distance, or the Kullback-Kleiber divergence. But here it will not work. And actually, we have a negative result, for instance, stated here with the total variation distance, which tells you that the minimax risk for the estimation of mu on such a setting with the total variation as a loss will be a completely degenerate problem. That's to say, even if n is very large, your number of observations, then the minimax risk will be always larger than 1/2. So in particular, it does not even converge to 0. It's not that it converges to 0 very slowly, it does not converge to 0. So this problem is really impossible. So to give you a feeling why this is the case, well, actually the reason is pretty stupid. It is just that in practice, what you will have access to is a finite number of samples. And given a finite number of samples, you will always have an infinite number of manifolds which will fit through those, which will fit this sample. And given two manifolds with distinct import and two measures supported on those two manifolds, then the total variation distance between the two measures will be equal to 1. So what happens is that even if you propose a measure which will have a support which is very close to the real manifold, then your loss for the total variation will be equal to 1. So of course this problem is way too complicated, and it is impossible actually. And so here the problem is that we are choosing a distance which is way too strong. So there is this classification for distances between probability measures. First, you have distances which are related to a strong topology on the set of measures. And more or less, it means that you have two distributions of masses, and you're comparing the two distributions vertically. You're looking at vertical displacement of masses. And when you're doing that, it means that that is related to a strong topology, and so it is hard to be close with respect to those metrics. And this is the case of the Kullback-Leibler divergence, the total variation, or the linear distance. And at the opposite, you have distances which are related to a weak topology of measures. And these are distances for which you will compare the distribution of masses horizontally. Okay, that's to say you are able to displace mass and to look at displacement of masses horizontally. And actually, we need to look at such a matrix, such a distance between probability measures. So we will choose such a metric, and what we'll choose is the Wasserstein distance. So the Wasserstein distance is defined in the following way. You take nu and nu, two probability measures on RD, and pi mu nu is a set of couplings or transport plans between nu and nu. So what is a transport plan? It is probability measures on the product space, RD times RD, such that the first marginal is equal to nu and the second marginal is equal to nu. And then you define, so if you want to have a picture, so you have the following picture, you have a red distribution of mass and a blue distribution of mass. And so what is a transport plan is just a way of moving the red mass towards the blue mass. And to each transport plan, you associate a cost, which is just the sum of all the displacement. And then the Wasserstein distance is, by definition, the best cost and optimal and a transport plan can have. Okay, so well, Wasserstein distances have been studied a lot. There are a lot of theoretical results and practical results on the subject. For us, there will just be one lemma that we will need, which is the following. You take mu and nu, which are two probability measures on a manifold, and you assume that those probability measures have densities which are lower bounded by some constant f min. Then the Wasserstein distance between mu and nu is controlled up to a constant by the negative Sobolev distance between mu and nu. So here you have mu minus nu norm in HP minus 1. So what this means is the following. The negative Sobolev norm is a supremum over all function phi's whose gradient has a finite as a LP star norm smaller than 1. So here P star is the conjugate exponent of P of mu of phi minus nu of phi. Okay? So maybe to have a little bit more of intuition on this inequality, we can look at what happened for P equal 1. So for P equal 1, you may know, if you're familiar with optimal transport, that there is something that is called the Kantorovich-Rubinstein duality formula. And the Kantorovich-Rubinstein duality formula tells you that the W1 distance between mu and nu is a supremum over mu of phi minus nu of phi, of mu of phi minus nu of phi over function phi, which are 1 Lipschitz. And actually, if P equal 1, then P star is equal to infinity. And what we're looking at with the negative Sobolev distance is exactly this quantity. And also you can check that the constant in the equation becomes 1 if P equal 1. So actually, if P equal 1, then this inequality is an equality, and this is an equality which is well known. This is just the Kantorovich-Rubinstein duality formula. So really what we should think about with this inequality is that it is a generalization of the Kantorovich-Rubinstein duality formula for P larger than 1. Okay? And I just want to give a second insight by considering the case D equal 1. Once again, if you're familiar with optimal transport, you may know that for D equal 1, the Wasserstein distance between probability measures is related to a distance, a LP distance between the cumulative distribution functions. And so, well, in some ways, this is why there is a -1 index appearing here. Because what we are doing is that we are not comparing the densities. If we are comparing the densities, there would be a LP norm appearing, but we are comparing the primitives of the densities. That's to say the cumulative distribution functions. And as we are comparing the densities, the primitives, there is a -1 index appearing. Okay. So this is just a few insights, because this inequality will be the key lemma for the following. Okay. So before going further, I just want to recall a few results on the estimation of measure with respect to Wasserstein loss, which exists in the literature. And well, what you have is the following. First, what you can consider is a very simple estimator, which is the empirical measure. And then people have studied a lot what is the risk of the empirical measure with respect to this Wasserstein loss in different settings. And in particular, we can show that in our setting, where we have a manifold of dimension d, then the risk is of order n to the power -1/d plus n to the power -1/2p. Okay? So the idea is that the rate is n to the power -1/d, but if p is very large, then the rate becomes very slow. Okay? But actually, what you can show is that if you make a supplementary assumption, which is to say that the density f is lower bounded and upper bounded, then the real rate, then you can forget about the second term of order n to the power -1/2p, and the real rate is of order n to the power -1/d. Okay. So really, that's the idea. You have the empirical measure on an object of dimension d. Then the risk of the empirical measure is of order n to the power -1/d, where d is the dimension. And then you can consider the question, or you can consider the same question, but now you assume that the underlying density f has some regularity s. And here, in the case where the support is a cube, there is a recent paper by Jonathan Niles-Weed and Quentin Barthé, in which they design estimators based on a wavelet density estimation, which attain a better rate than the empirical measure. And so here, what we would like to do is the same thing that in this paper by Jonathan Niles-Weed and Quentin Barthé, but we have two problems. First, here, well, we are not on a cube, but on an object which is not flat. And second problem, we do not even know what is this object, because we do not have access to this object. We only have access to a finite number of samples. So let us see how we can solve this problem. All right. So I just need one last definition, which is to say that we need also to quantify, to say what it means exactly to have a density of regularity S. And so here, this is just a classical definition of a Sobolev space, but on the manifold. So it is defined as follows. You just say that the HSP norm of F is the maximum of the LP norm of the derivatives up to order S. And then you have your statistical model, PSKD, which depend actually on a lot of parameters. But the idea is just a set of probability distributions mu, which are supported on some manifold M of dimension D, which is of regularity K, and the underlying density should be of regularity S. And then our question is to know what is the min-max risk on such a model for the Wasserstein loss. Okay. So let us first consider the easy case where we assume that we have access to the manifold. And here what we are going to do is the same thing as before in the flat case. We are just going to adapt small details, but this is the same idea as in the flat case. We're going to do kernel density estimation. So kernel K is the same thing as before, but now there is just a very small change here. You should assume that the integral against r to the power small d is equal to 1 and not large d, because you're considering a small d dimensional object. And the convolution is defined as before. Here, there is just a slight change in the normalization, because once again, you're looking at a small d dimensional object. And you will consider mu and h, which is still the measure having density kh star mu n, but now it is not the measure having this density with respect to the ambient Lebesgue measure, but with the analog of the Lebesgue measure on the manifold that we call the volume measure on the manifold. Okay, so mu and h will be a measure supported on the manifold with density kh star mu n. And here there is a key property which will make everything works, which is the following. If you look at the integral over m of kh(x minus y against dy, then, well, if m is flat, then this is equal to 1, okay, by the assumption that we have made. But actually, the kernel is not flat, so we have a correction term, and we can show that this is of order 1 plus something which is of order h to the power k, so small, where m is ck. All right, and here what happened is that we'll use our key lemma, okay, so this one, and say that the Wasserstein distance between mu and h is smaller, up to a constant, than the negative Sobolev distance between mu and h. That's to say, the only thing that we have to do is to bound the negative Sobolev distance. And here it becomes very nice because now we are in a Banach space. And so we have very nice bias variance decomposition. And for instance, if you look at the bias, then once again it will be given by the, it will be bounded by the operator norm of the same operator. And here what's important is that you will have one change, which is that now you're not looking at the operator norm from HSP to LP as before, but now the codomain is equal to H minus 1P, because we have this negative Sobolev distance. And so what you're about to say is to bound this operator norm by something of order h to the power s plus 1. So here, why there is a plus 1 appearing? Well, it is because what really matters is the distance between s and minus 1. So s plus 1. And before we had h to the power s because it was the distance between s and 0. Okay, so this is the first thing. We have a supplementary factor h because we have a negative Sobolev distance. So this is the bias. And now we have the variance. And here I will not get into the details, but by using some standard tools of harmonic analysis on your manifold, you can show that the fluctuation term is of order h over square root of nh to the power d. So here there are two interesting things about this term. First, you can see that there is a supplementary factor h appearing. And once again, this is before we are looking at the negative Sobolev distance. And second, we can see that now you have a small d in the exponent and not a large d. And if you remember, well, we had problems in high dimension with our previous estimator because the variance becomes very large when the dimension is large. And here you see that, well, now this term is small because you have a small d in the exponent. Okay. So really you have the same picture as before, with bias which increases and variance which decreases with h. And if you try to find the optimal h, then it will be of the order n to the power minus 1 over 2s plus d, as before. And you will obtain a risk of order n to the power minus s plus 1 over 2s plus d. And also you can show that this is the minimax risk. So we know we cannot do better than this. All right. So cool, we are done, right? We have designed a minimax estimator. We can go to lunch. Actually, no, for a very simple reason. We have assumed that we have access to M. Okay, if you look at the definition of our estimator, it is the measure with density kh star mu n. So it's not an issue. We can compute this, but with respect to the volume measure. And of course, if we do not know what M is, we do not know also what the volume measure is. So this is the last step. We need to reconstruct the volume measure. All right, so as I said before, mu and h is not an estimator. So what we will do is just replace vol m in this definition by some estimator hat vol m of vol m. And then we'll have a real estimator and it will be okay. And here there is a first idea. which consists in saying that, okay, we know how to estimate manifolds. There are a lot of papers in the literature which tells you, I give you a sample of points, then it will output some object which is close to, for the other distance to the manifold. So if I look at the d-dimensional Hausdorff measure on some proxy hat of M of your manifold, then maybe it will be a good estimate of the volume measure. So for instance, there is this estimator from the paper of Eddy Amari and Clément Levrard. So I will not get into the detail. The idea is that they use some local polynomial estimator, and they are able to obtain some estimator hat Ti of the tangent space Txi at the point Xi, and some estimator hat Psi I of Psi Xi of the local parametrization. And they have some rate of convergence. Their estimator depends on some scale parameter epsilon. And basically what they managed to prove is that you can approximate the tangent space with precision n to the power minus k minus 1 over d, and you can approximate the local parametrization with precision n to the power minus k over d. Okay, these are just rates of convergence. And the idea is that if you look at hat of M, which is defined as a union of small polynomial patches of size epsilon, then it will be a good approximation of the manifold. It will be a distance epsilon to the power k, where k is the regularity of the manifold. So what happened if we consider the volume measure, the d-dimensional Hausdorff measure, restricted to hat of M? Well, it will not work. It will not be close to the real volume measure for a very stupid reason, which is the following. So hat M is a union of local polynomial patches. And assume, for instance, that you have two patches, one at x1, one at x2. And actually, what will happen is that you will have some overlap between the patches. And when you consider the d-dimensional Hausdorff measure on this set, then the overlap will be counted twice. Whereas we would like this region to be counted only once in some way. So what we need to do is to modify a little bit this idea. And one way to do this is to use a partition of unity. So here there is a first step. I will not get into the details, it's technical. The idea is that we'll use farthest point sampling algorithm to pre-process the points, but whatever, it's just to obtain a nice point cloud without too much accumulation of points. But the interesting idea is the following, and now you can just build a partition of unity, which is a sequence of function xi of j, which are supported on a small ball around xj, such that the sum of the xi j is equal to 1 on the tubular neighborhood of your manifold. And now you have this very simple remark, which is the following. If you look at the integral of some function phi against the volume measure, then what you can write is 1 equals the sum of the xi j of x, and then just switch between switch the integral and the sum, and you obtain that this is equal to the sum over j of the integral over the small polynomial patch of the small patch around xj of xi j of x times phi of x. And now what we're going to do is just take this expression and look at the plugin estimator. That's to say, we have an estimator hat tj of txj of m, and an estimator hat psi j of psi xj of the graph of the local parametrization at point xj, so that we can define our manifold estimator hat vol m by just saying that the integral of phi against hat vol m is equal to this quantity. And so we define the unique measure. And what we can show is that with high probability, the Wasserstein distance between this estimator and the real volume measure is of order n to the power minus k over t. And actually, this is the minimax rate. Just to say, you can do better than this. And so, well, now we can define our estimator, which is just the measure having density kh star mu n with respect to this estimator of the volume measure. And I just want to conclude with a very simple toy example where you consider a sample x1 xn according to some measure supported on a non-submanifold. And what you may want to do is to resample to have much more points according to the same distribution. And what you can do is to compute your estimator at mu nh and then sample points according to this new measure. And so here you have a very simple example where at first you have a few points sample around the circle uniformly, and then you can compute your estimator and sample more points according to the distribution. And you will see that you will have some small mistakes sometimes, but more or less it gives you a sample of points which is close to being uniform on the circle. Okay, so that's all I have to say. Of course, you can ask questions. Please ask questions, and thank you.